The tear ran down the front of her uniform. It wasn't an accident. Sabine Alexandra is 31. She is the lead flight attendant on a private charter from Zurich to Seoul, a black woman whose navy blazer and crimson silk scarf are the only armor she has ever needed. The rotation pays her mother's bills. She does not make mistakes. In seat 2A sits Min Jae-so. The Korean Mafia call him the Quiet One. A black dragon climbs the left side of his neck, its head resting just below his jaw. He watches everything and says almost nothing. His girlfriend watches too. She reads his silence as an insult. So she complains about the coffee. She knocks a glass to the floor and orders Sabine to clean it. And when Sabine kneels over the broken pieces, the woman says something about black women and the way they use their faces. Sabine stands. She asks the woman to repeat it in front of the captain. The woman lunges. Buttons rip. The scarf falls. The seam of a navy dress tears open at 30,000 feet. Sabine pulls a gray blanket over her shoulders and demands the assault be logged. And then the quiet man rises from his seat and gives one order no one on that plane expected. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a member and help our channel. Sabine counted the champagne flutes twice before the first passenger reached the top of the air stair. 16. She wanted 18. 2 were chipped, and a chip on a Harrington charter was not a chip. It was a reason. She wrapped the 2 flawed glasses in a linen napkin and slid them behind the galley curtain, out of the count, out of the story. The remaining 14 she lined up along the polished steel like a row of soldiers. Her fingers moved without her watching them. 12 years of this. The hands knew. "Cabin's yours in 4 minutes," a voice said behind her. Grace stood in the aisle, small, quick, already pinning her crimson scarf. She had the look of someone who had run to make the crew bus. She always had that look. "Manifest?" Sabine asked. 11 passengers. One of them owns the plane. None of them own the plane. The company owns the plane. We work for the company. Grace smiled at the correction. She had heard it before. Everyone in the galley had heard it before, and none of them minded, because when Sabine said it, she was not correcting them. She was reminding herself. The Zurich air came down the jet bridge cold and thin. Sabine felt it on the back of her neck and let it stay there. She checked her reflection in the curve of the oven door, the navy blazer buttoned to the throat, the gold buttons catching the cabin light, the crimson silk knotted clean under her chin. Hair pinned, watch straight, nothing loose, nothing that could be grabbed. This was the rotation. Zurich to Seoul, non-stop, private charter, the kind of leg that got handed to a lead cabin attendant once a season and got remembered for a year. It carried the seniority points that decided who flew the good routes and who flew the milk runs. It carried the pay differential that covered her mother's care home in the 12th district, the one with the window that faced the trees, the one Sabine had promised and could not unpromise now. No margin for error. She had said it to herself in the crew hotel that morning, brushing her teeth. She said it again now, silently, and squared the flutes 1 degree straighter. Her phone had buzzed twice in the crew room before she powered it down, both from the care home. The first was a photograph, her mother by the window, the trees behind the glass just starting to turn, a nurse's arm at the edge of the frame. The second was the number, the autumn adjustment, a figure with more digits than it had carried in spring, sent without comment, because the home did not need to comment. The number said everything the home wanted to say. Sabine had looked at the number for a long moment, and then at the photograph, and then put the phone in the zip pocket of her flight bag, the inside one, and zipped it. The rotation covered the number. She had done the math in the shower. The rotation covered the number if she flew it clean. "They're boarding," Grace whispered. Sabine stepped into the aisle and became the version of herself that the job required. Spine long, chin level, the smile that opened a fraction and went no further. The first 3 passengers were staff, assistants, a security man with a jaw like a drawer, a woman carrying 2 phones and using both. Sabine greeted each by nothing, because names had not been offered, and she did not guess at names. She took coats. She noted seats. She logged, without appearing to log, that the security man's eyes swept the cabin twice before his body followed. Then the principals came. The woman came first, and the cabin adjusted to her the way a room adjusts to a draft. Ivory silk, cut long, a sleeve that fell off one shoulder in a way that had cost someone a great deal of thought. Platinum hair to the waist, diamonds at the ear and the finger, emerald cut, the kind that threw light in hard little knives. She walked the aisle the way a woman walks a runway she believes she is being filmed on, and she looked at Sabine for exactly as long as it takes to decide something is furniture. "Ms. Harrington," Sabine said, "welcome aboard. You're in the forward suite, left." Victoria did not answer. She handed Sabine a clutch, cream, quilted, small, and kept walking, as if a hand had appeared from the wall to receive it. Sabine held the clutch and did not let her face do anything at all. The man came behind her, and he was different, and Sabine registered the difference before she could name it. He did not fill the aisle. He moved through it. Tall, narrow, a 3-piece the color of wet coal with the top button open at the throat, and rising out of that collar, black ink climbing the left side of his neck, a dragon, tail near the collarbone, the head cresting just under the jaw. He wore no tie. He wore a watch heavy enough to be a decision. His eyes found the cabin, found the galley, found the count of glasses, found the wrapped napkin behind the curtain where the 2 chipped flutes were hidden. Then his eyes found her, and stayed a half-second past courtesy, and moved on. "Sir," she said, "welcome aboard." "CO," he said. That was all. Not a correction, not a greeting. A fact he was handing her so she would have it. Min Jae-so took the window of the forward suite, right side, across the aisle from the woman in ivory. He sat the way careful men sit, once, without adjustment. He did not ask where things were. He had already found them. Sabine went back up the aisle. Grace was in the galley with the manifest card pressed to her chest. "That's him," Grace breathed. "The quiet one. You know who that is. He's a passenger." Sabine. "He's a passenger, Grace. So is she. So is the man with the 2 phones." She took the clutch she was still holding and set it, upright, in the forward stowage where the passenger's eyes could find it. "We don't know anything about anybody on this plane except their seat and their meal. Keep it that way, and nobody gets to make us part of their story." Grace nodded, but her eyes went once more toward the forward suite, and Sabine understood the pull, because she had felt it too, the small gravitational thing the man carried, and she disliked that she had felt it, and she filed it in the same place she filed the cold on her neck. Noted, not felt. The security man stopped her once as she passed, a hand raised, not touching. "Galley knives," he said. "Count and location. 2. Forward galley, locked drawer, keyed to me and the purser." She met his eyes and held them. "You'll get the count on the ground if procedure asks." "In the air, the drawer stays locked." He studied her, then let the hand drop. "Good," he said, and it sounded like it cost him nothing to say, and meant more than nothing. And behind him, across the aisle, Min Jae had heard it, and Min Jae's eyes came up from his cuff, and rested on her a moment, and went back down. The door closed. The pressure changed. The air stair pulled away and took Zurich with it. Sabine did the safety brief herself, standing in the forward galley where the principals could see her, and not bother to look. She spoke the words she had spoken 4,000 times, and she watched the cabin the whole time without seeming to watch anything. The security man buckling low and loose so he could stand fast, the woman in ivory scrolling with her thumb, the assistant with 2 phones now down to 1. Min Jae watched the brief, all of it. His eyes stayed on her hands as she pointed to the exits, on her mouth as she formed the words, and it was not the way men usually watched her, which was as a thing to be measured. He watched the way an inspector watches a machine he respects. When she reached the line about the nearest exit possibly being behind you, his mouth moved, very slightly, as if he had been waiting to see whether she would rush it. She did not rush it. His mouth settled. She looked away first. That was a rule too. The woman in ivory had not watched the brief. She had watched her own reflection in the darkened window, and when Sabine said the word oxygen, she had made a small sound through her nose, a laugh with no joy in it, and glanced across the aisle to see whether the man had heard her be amused. He had not looked. That, too, seemed to cost the woman something. Sabine saw it and folded the seeing away with the rest. The loose belt, the 2 phones, the way the assistant flinched each time the woman shifted in her seat. A cabin told you what it was in the first hour if you let it. This one was telling her plenty. They climbed out over the lake and turned east. When the belt sign went dark, Sabine started the service, because the first hour of a 14-hour leg set the tone for all the hours after it, and she said it herself. She brought the woman in ivory sparkling water, no ice, lime on the side, because the pre-flight sheet had said so. Victoria took it without looking, drank a third, and set it in the armrest well, at an angle that would spill on the first pocket of rough air. Sabine reached across, quietly, and straightened it. Victoria's eyes came up. "Did I ask you to touch that?" "No, ma'am. Turbulence over the mountains. I moved it so you wouldn't lose it." Victoria looked at her for a moment longer than the sentence deserved. Then she turned back to the window. "Don't reach across me." "Of course." Sabine went to the galley and let out a breath she had been holding since the woman's eyes came up. Grace was watching. "She's going to be work," Grace murmured. "They're all work. Some of them just tell you sooner." She lifted the coffee service and checked the temperature of the pot against her wrist. "That's a kindness, actually. The ones who tell you sooner." She brought Min Jae coffee, black, because he had not filled out a sheet, and a man in a 3-piece who boards without asking for anything is a man who drinks it black. She was right. He took the cup, looked at it, looked at her. "You hid 2 glasses," he said. Her hand did not move on the pot. "2 were chipped, sir. I took them out of service. You could have poured into them and turned the chip away from the mouth. Faster." "I could have. I don't serve a chipped glass. If it breaks in someone's hand at 40,000 feet, that's my name on the report, and it's the passenger's lip." She refilled his cup a half-inch, though it did not need it, to have something for her hands to do. "I'd rather be slow and clean." Something happened at the corner of his eyes that on another man she would have called the beginning of a smile. On him it was only a shift, a registering. He set the cup down without drinking. "Sit," he said, not to her, to the assistant hovering at his shoulder, who sat. Then, to Sabine, he reached into the breast of the coal-colored jacket and brought out a folded band of notes, Swiss francs, a thickness of them, folded once. He held it out across the armrest, low, the way men pass things they expect to be taken quietly. "For the leg," he said. "For you, not the company." The cabin did not change. The engines held their note. But Sabine felt the moment go very still around her hands, because this was the hinge, this small folded thing, and how she took it, or did not take it, would tell everyone on the plane exactly who she was. She did not look at the money, she looked at him. "That's kind, sir. I can't take it in the cabin." "It's not for the cabin, it's for you." Anything above my fare goes through the company. It gets logged, it gets taxed, it gets split with the crew who don't get seen back there. She nodded toward the galley curtain, behind which Grace was pretending to fold a linen and folding nothing. If you'd like to recognize the service, there's a line for it on the post-flight card. It reaches everyone. This reaches only me. The notes stayed in the air between them for a second longer than was comfortable. The woman in ivory had turned her head, was watching now, the thumb stopped on the screen. Min-jae looked at Sabine, and the folded band went back into his jacket, unhurried, as if it had never come out. "Understood," he said. She should have moved off then. She had won the moment, and the rule of the moment was that you left before it curdled. But he spoke again, low, only for her. "Most people take it." "Most people aren't wearing this," she said, and touched, once, the crimson scarf at her throat. Not a fidget, a placement, the way a soldier touches a collar. "This is the company's, and it's the only thing on me that says I earned my way onto this airplane and didn't get carried on. I'd like to keep it meaning that." He looked at the scarf. He looked at her face. And this time, when his eyes moved away, it was not dismissal. It was something closer to the way you set down a thing you have decided is heavier than it looked. Sabine went back to the galley. Her pulse was up. She hated that her pulse was up. "What did he say?" Grace whispered. "He offered a tip. I sent it to the card." Grace's eyes went wide and pleased and afraid all at once. "You turned down cash from that man?" "I turned down cash from a passenger." Sabine took the coffee pot back to its cradle and clicked it home. "The day I take money in the cabin to be treated better than the woman folding linen behind me, I'm not lead anymore. I'm just the one who got tipped. There's a difference, and it's the whole difference. My mother cleaned other people's kitchens for 30 years, Sabine said, quieter now, to the clean counter more than to Grace. In Basel, in houses where they called her by the wrong name and didn't correct themselves. She used to come home and iron her own collar for the next day like it was armor. I didn't understand it then. She set the last cup in its rack. I bought this uniform's meaning with her back. I'm not selling it for a fold of francs at 40,000 feet. Grace didn't answer. She looked at Sabine the way she sometimes did, the look that Sabine pretended not to see, the one that said, "You're the reason I don't quit." Sabine turned to the counter so she wouldn't have to hold the look. She wiped a surface that was already clean. Down the aisle, the woman in ivory said something to the man across from her, low, a smile in it that was not a kind smile, and he did not answer, and the not answering was its own kind of loud. 14 hours to Seoul, 13 and a half to go. Sabine checked the flutes again. 14, she wanted 18 and had 14, and would make 14 enough, because that was the job, to make what you had enough, and to let no one see the seam where it wasn't. She straightened the row one more time. Her mother's window faced the trees. The rotation covered the window. The scarf was clean at her throat. She had touched nothing she shouldn't and taken nothing that wasn't hers, and if she kept it that way for 13 and a half more hours, she would land in Seoul exactly the woman who had boarded in Zurich, and that was all she wanted, and she believed, in the clean, cold certainty of hour one, that it was a thing entirely within her power to protect. Behind her, across the aisle, the woman in ivory set her water glass back in the armrest well, at an angle, again, on purpose, and watched to see if Sabine would come and straighten it. Sabine let it sit. The glass stayed at its angle for 40 minutes. Sabine walked past it 4 times and let it stay. Victoria noticed. That was the point of leaving it. A woman who tilts a glass on purpose is not thirsty. She is fishing, and the thing she wants to catch is a reaction. Sabine refused to be caught. She poured, she cleared, she smiled at the 2 assistants who did say thank you, and each time she crossed the aisle, she looked at the tilted glass, the way you look at a spill you have already decided not to own. Somewhere over the Alps, the cabin lights dimmed to cruise. The window shades on the left side glowed white with snow glare off the peaks below. Min Jae had his shade half down and a folded newspaper on his knee he had not turned in an hour. He was watching the aisle. He was watching her work. Victoria felt him watching. That was the match to the fuse, though no one in the cabin could have named it yet. A man's quiet attention, aimed at the wrong woman. Victoria had spent the flight arranging herself to be seen, the manicured hand along the armrest, the platinum hair caught and released, the diamonds turned to catch the reading light, and none of it had pulled his eyes off the crew member in the navy blazer. She set her jaw. She pressed the call button. Sabine came at once. "Miss Harrington." "It's cold." Victoria didn't look up. "This whole side of the cabin is freezing. Do something about it." "Of course. I'll bring the temperature up 2 degrees and get you a throw." Sabine started to turn. "I didn't ask for a blanket. I asked you to fix it. The flight deck controls the zones. I've already sent the adjustment forward." True. She had touched the panel on the way over. "It takes a few minutes to move through the cabin. The throw is so you're comfortable in the meantime." Victoria's mouth curled. "You have an answer for everything." "I try to have a solution for everything." The correction landed soft, but it landed. It is a small thing to refuse someone the word they hand you and give them a better one back, but done in front of an audience, it reads as a kind of quiet insolence, and Victoria heard the insolence more clearly than she heard the courtesy wrapped around it. One of the assistants across the aisle looked down at her phone to hide her face. Min Jae's eyes moved, once, from Sabine to Victoria and back. A small motion, the swing of a needle. Victoria caught it. She caught all of it. The coffee came next. Sabine had just poured Min Jae a second cup. Black, the way he took it. The way he had taken it for 6 hours. When Victoria lifted her own untouched cup off the tray table and held it out into the aisle at arm's length. "This is cold too." It was not cold. It had been served 4 minutes ago and steam still stood off it. Sabine looked at the steam. She looked at Victoria's face, which had arranged itself into something patient and reasonable for the benefit of anyone who might later be asked what happened. "Let me bring you a fresh one," Sabine said. "Do." She turned to go. Behind her she heard the small wet sound of a cup being tipped, and then the flat slap of ceramic on the carpeted aisle. She turned back. The cup lay on its side by her heel. Coffee crawled out across the wool in a dark fan. Victoria had already withdrawn her hand and folded it back in her lap. "Oh," Victoria said, "look what you made me do." The cabin went a shade quieter. Not silent. The engines never let it be silent, but the assistant stopped talking, and the security man near the galley turned his head. Min Jae set the newspaper down on the empty seat beside him. Sabine crouched. This was the training, and the training was armor. When a passenger creates a mess to shame you, you make the mess small by handling it smaller than they hoped. She righted the cup. She lifted the linen napkin from Victoria's tray and laid it over the spreading coffee, and the dark bloomed up through the white. Grace had come to the galley curtain. Sabine felt her there without turning, the particular stillness of a colleague deciding whether to step in, and understanding, correctly, that stepping in now would only give Victoria a second target. Sabine's hand moved once, low and flat against her thigh, out of Victoria's sightline. "Stay." Grace stayed. The security man had drifted a pace closer, reading the geometry of the aisle the way men in his trade read rooms. Even the woman with the 2 phones had stopped scrolling. A private cabin at cruise is a small country, and everyone in it had just felt the border shift. "I'll have this out of the carpet before Seoul," she said, level. "It won't stain. You'll have it out." Victoria leaned forward. Her voice dropped to the register, meant to travel exactly as far as one crouched woman and no further. "Of course you will. That's what you're for." Sabine kept her eyes on her hands. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you." She looked up. And Victoria smiled, because she had the eyes now. Not just Sabine's, but the man's, the whole front cabin's, and an audience was the only thing she had ever really wanted. She let the moment stretch. Then she said the thing. "Girls like you." A slow, careful drawl, sanded smooth so it could sound like observation. "You always think if you're pretty enough, someone won't notice what you actually are, that the face buys you a seat at the table." Her gaze slid, deliberate, to Min-jae, then back. "It doesn't. Wipe the floor. That's the table you were given." There it was, out loud, in the open air of the cabin, over the Alps, at cruise. Sabine did not move for one full second. Not because she was afraid, because a woman who has spent 12 years being spoken to like furniture learns the exact weight of a sentence, and she was weighing this one. The napkin was warm and wet under her palm. Her mother's face came up unbidden, the gray light of a Basel kitchen, the wrong name called across it for 30 years, the collar pressed sharp every morning like a blade you wear instead of draw. Sabine had promised herself she would never wear the collar the way her mother wore it. Head down, answer to the wrong name, wipe the floor. Her mother had wiped the floor. 30 years of other people's kitchens in Basel, on her knees on tile that belonged to families who never learned her name, and she had come home each night and pressed her collar for the morning, as if the uniform were a thing that could not be taken from her. Sabine had watched her do it 1,000 times. She had sworn the uniform would mean the opposite for her daughter. Not the badge of the one who wipes, the badge of the one who is trusted with the aircraft, the crew, the door, the lives at 39,000 feet. And a woman in an ivory dress had just told her, in front of witnesses, that the badge was a lie and the floor was the table. The napkin was warm and wet under her palm. She lifted her hand off it. She placed both palms flat on her own knees, the way you plant yourself before you rise, and she let the promise she had made her mother do the deciding. She stood up. She did it slowly, the way you rise when you have decided something, and the coffee-soaked napkin she set on Victoria's own tray table, folded once, deliberate, so the stain faced up. The security man took half a step. Min-jae lifted one finger off his knee. Not much, just enough, and the security man stopped. "Miss Harrington," Sabine's voice carried now. She had let it. "I'd like to make sure I have your words exactly. Would you say that again?" Victoria blinked. "Excuse me? What you just said, about girls like me and the table I was given." Sabine's hands were open at her sides, steady. "I want you to say it once more, in front of the cabin, and when Captain Lindquist comes back on the intercom, I'm going to ask you to say it a third time to him, for the record." The color came up under Victoria's porcelain in 2 hard patches. She had built the whole thing to be deniable. A spill, a tone, a comment thin enough to evaporate. Sabine had just refused to let it evaporate. Sabine had asked her to sign it. "How dare you?" Victoria's voice climbed off the private register into something the whole front cabin could hear. "How dare you speak to me? Do you know who my family is? Do you know whose plane this is? The airlines. Do not. The airline owns the aircraft. You're a passenger. I'm the lead cabin attendant." Sabine did not raise her voice to meet Victoria's. She let hers stay flat and let the flatness do the work. "You can file any complaint you like when we land. I'll help you fill out the form, but I'm going to log what you said, and I'm going to ask the flight deck to log it too, because it happened in my cabin, and that makes it mine to report. I'll help you fill out the form." Sabine repeated it because she wanted Victoria to hear the shape of what came next. Paperwork, signatures, a record with a date and a cabin number. "Everything you said, everything I logged. Neither of us has to remember it wrong later. It'll be written down." That was the sentence that changed the temperature. Not the standing, not the tone. The word. Written. A woman who has spent a lifetime being told her account does not count had just informed an heiress that this time there would be a document, and the heiress understood, in a way that reached her before her pride did, that a document was the one weapon her name could not simply outspend. For a moment, Victoria seemed to run out of script. Her mouth worked, her eyes cut fast toward Min Jae, a single flick, checking the audience, checking whether the man she had staged all of this for was seeing her win. He was not seeing her win. He was leaning forward now, forearms on his knees, watching Sabine with an expression that had gone very still and very interested, the way a man looks at the one person in a room who has just changed the odds. The dragon at his throat rode above the open collar. He said nothing. That was its own kind of verdict, and Victoria read it, and it undid her. Because this was the arithmetic Victoria had never bothered to learn. She had spent her life in rooms where a name did the work of a person, where the staff blurred into the wallpaper, and the wallpaper did not answer back. She had provoked 100 women like Sabine, and watched every one of them fold, apologize, wipe the floor, because folding was cheaper than the fight. She had assumed the man watching would enjoy the folding. Instead, he had watched the one who would not fold, and now his silence was aimed at her, and there is nothing a purchased life fears more than a silence it cannot buy. She came out of the seat. It was not graceful. The seatbelt caught her hip, and she wrenched against it and half rose into the aisle, and her hand shot out, not to slap, that would have been cleaner, but to grab. She got a fistful of navy lapel. The blazer was tailored close, and the seam had no give, and when Victoria hauled, the stitching along the shoulder let go, with a sound like paper. Sabine rocked back a step. Victoria didn't let go. The second pull tore the lapel down, and the button, one of the small gold ones, skipped off the seat back and vanished under a row. The crimson scarf, tucked and knotted since boarding, came loose at one end and slid off Sabine's shoulder and hung. "You," Victoria was saying, or something like it, high and cracked. "You do not get to." Her nails caught the side seam of the navy dress as Sabine twisted away, and the fabric parted along the hip, a bright ripping line, 6 inches of it, cold air finding the skin under it. There is a particular sound a person makes when the thing they wore as proof is torn off their body in public. Sabine did not make it. She caught her balance against a seatback with one hand, and with the other she let go of the reflex to grab, to shove, to answer the grab with a grab, because a lifetime of watching her mother had taught her exactly how this footage would be cut if she gave them a single frame of her hand closing into a fist. She kept the hand open, she kept it low. Whatever this became, it would not become the story of the crew member who struck a passenger. Then the cabin was full of motion at once. The security man was there. One assistant was up with both hands out. A voice, Grace's, from the galley curtain, said Sabine's name, sharp. And Sabine stood in the middle of it, with the blazer hanging open off one shoulder, the scarf loose, the dress split along the seam, coffee still cooling on the carpet at her feet, and she did not cover herself, and she did not cry. She looked down at Victoria's hand, still knotted in the ruined lapel. "Let go," she said. Victoria let go, not because of the words, because Min Jae-seo had risen out of his seat. He did it without hurry, the way he did everything, unfolding to his full height in the narrow aisle, and the front cabin resorted itself around him, the way a room resorts around the person who is actually in charge. The security man went still. The assistants stepped back. Even the engines seemed to drop a register, though that was only the ears choosing what to hear. Victoria sank into her seat as if a hand had pressed her there. Min Jae did not look at Victoria. He looked at the button under the seat, and the scarf, and the torn seam, and the coffee, and last of all at Sabine's face. Whatever he found there set the muscle in his jaw. And Sabine, standing torn and straight in the middle of the aisle, did the last thing anyone in that cabin expected. She reached up with a steady hand, gathered the loose end of the crimson scarf, and pulled it back onto her shoulder. Not to hide anything. To finish dressing herself on her own terms, in front of all of them, before another soul could decide what she needed. She looked at Victoria, whose fist was still curled around a thread of navy wool she had torn free. "You wanted the cabin to see me on the floor," Sabine said. "Quiet now, every word placed. They saw you put me there." The intercom chimed. Captain Lindquist's voice, calm and Nordic and utterly unaware, filled the cabin with a note about the descent into their fuel stop and the weather waiting in Seoul. Nobody moved. Not the assistants, not the security man with his hand half inside his jacket, not Min Jae standing in the narrow aisle with his eyes fixed on the woman he had watched pour coffee for 6 hours and had just watched refuse to break. And Sabine turned toward the flight deck door, torn uniform, loose seam, spine straight, because the man who would log this was on the other side of it, and she had already decided she was going to be the one who told him. The flight deck door was 3 steps away when the seatbelt sign chimed off above her head. Sabine took the first step. Behind her, silk hissed against leather. Victoria was out of her seat again. "You are not going anywhere near that door." Sabine stopped. She turned only her head. Victoria stood in the aisle with one hand braced on the seat back, chin lifted, the diamonds throwing hard little points of light. The whole cabin watched the space between the 2 women, close to nothing. "I have to report an assault," Sabine said. "That is the door I report it through. You'll report that you were clumsy." "No." One word. It landed harder than a paragraph. Victoria's jaw worked. She had run out of script an hour of adrenaline ago, and improvising was not something her family had trained into her. Sabine reached up and gripped the ruined lapel of her own blazer. She peeled it off her shoulder, worked her arm free of the torn seam, then the other, and folded the jacket once over her forearm. Underneath, the navy dress hung open along the 6-inch tear at her hip, pale skin showing at the seam. She let it show. Covering it now, in front of them, would have looked like shame, and she had decided in the last 10 minutes that shame belonged to the woman in ivory, not to her. Grace moved first. She slipped past the security man, pulled a folded gray blanket from the overhead bin, the aircraft's own, the ones handed out on night legs, and held it out with both hands. Sabine took it. She draped it around her shoulders and held the edges closed at her collarbone with one fist. The blazer she kept folded over her other arm. Evidence. Not laundry. "Captain Lindquist," she said toward the closed door, loud enough to carry through it. "Cabin lead requesting the flight deck log, the last 15 minutes, passenger on crew. I need it time-stamped." The intercom crackled. Lindquist's voice came back level, the same voice that had announced the fuel stop. "Understood. Logging now. Cabin lead, keep the aisle clear." Victoria's face changed. She had spent the whole flight certain that the machine of the world tilted her way, and the machine had just answered a black flight attendant by name and called her the passenger. She crossed the last of the aisle in 2 strides. Her hand came up open, aimed at the blanket, at the collar, at whatever she could grab to drag Sabine back down where she wanted her. Sabine had a glass in her free hand. Min Jae's. The second cup of black coffee. No, not coffee. She had lifted the open bottle of red from the service cart when she reached for the blanket, out of habit, to keep it from tipping in the aisle. It was in her fist now, cork out, half full. She did not think it through. There was no time to think it through. Victoria's nails closed on the blanket. Sabine's wrist turned. The wine went out of the bottle in a single dark rope and struck Victoria across the chest. The marfil silk, the drapey sleeve, the long clean line of the dress that had cost more than Sabine's mother's care cost in a season. It bloomed there, spreading, black-red against ivory, running down toward the hem. Victoria screamed. Not pain, something higher, the sound of a possession being ruined. She yanked. Sabine yanked back, and the loose drapey sleeve, already half torn from the earlier grab, gave way at the shoulder seam and came off in Sabine's hand. Victoria staggered back into her own seat, one shoulder bare, the front of her dress soaked through, holding a fistful of nothing. For a second, nobody breathed. Then Sabine set the bottle upright on the cart. She laid the torn ivory sleeve on top of her own folded blazer, on top of the wine-stained linen napkin from before, building the little stack of proof one ruined thing at a time. "Now we both have something to log," she said. Victoria looked down at herself. Her hands hovered over the stain without touching it, the way you hover over a burn. "You did this," she whispered. "You threw wine on me. Everyone saw you throw wine on me. Everyone saw you tear my uniform first. You'll lose your job. Then I'll lose it on the record." Sabine's voice stayed low and even, the voice she used for turbulence, the voice that told 200 people to fasten their belts without making one of them panic. Every word. Time-stamped. Yours and mine. That was the moment Min Jae stood. He had been on his feet already, technically, since the tearing, but he had stayed at the edge of it, one step back, letting the two women burn through their own fuel. Now he moved into the center of the aisle, and the cabin rearranged itself around him the way iron filings turn toward a magnet. The security man straightened. The woman with two phones lowered them both. Even Victoria, mid-collapse, went still. He did not look at Victoria first. He looked at the stack on the cart, the blazer, the napkin, the sleeve, then the wine bottle standing upright where Sabine had set it. Then, last, Sabine's face. "Say it again," he said to her. "All of it, from the beginning." What she said. Sabine held his eyes. "You want me to perform it for you. I want it out loud in this cabin, while 11 people can hear it, and none of them can pretend later that they misremembered." He turned his head a few degrees toward the security man. "Nobody leaves their seat until she's done." The security man reached into his jacket, not for a weapon, for a phone, and Min Jae stopped him with 3 words. "Not yet, wait." Then, to the cabin at large, in the same flat tone he might have used to order coffee, "Every phone, every device, collect them, now." The assistants started to protest. The woman with 2 phones actually took a step back toward the galley curtain, clutching them to her chest, and the security man was on her before she finished the step, one broad hand out, palm up, patient and immovable. "You can't take our phones," an assistant said. "There are things on there." "That is exactly why," Min Jae said. He did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. That was the whole point of the nickname, the quiet one, and the cabin was learning in real time why a room full of dangerous men went silent when he spoke at a whisper. "Every device into the galley bin, sealed. The only camera that stays live is the aircraft's. Captain," he lifted his chin toward the flight deck door, "the cabin recorder. Is it running?" The intercom answered, "It's running." "Then it does not stop." "Not on descent, not on the ground, not when someone important asks it to. Cabin lead witnesses that it does not stop." He looked at Sabine. "You'll want that." She understood what he was doing before he finished saying it, and she hated a little how much she needed it. He was not rescuing her. He was building the same wall she was building, from the other side, because it served him, because a scandal in his cabin, on his charter, in front of his people, was a liability he wanted controlled and documented rather than leaked and shaped by someone else. Their goals had touched by accident. The record she demanded to save herself was the record he demanded to protect himself. That was the whole alliance, not affection, arithmetic. "Grace," Sabine said. "Bin, galley. Seal it and note the time on the manifest." "Already moving," Grace said, and she was sliding the phones one by one into the lined bin they used for customs on international legs, the small silver cross at her throat swinging as she bent, her hands the steadiest hands in the cabin. She was the one, Sabine would think later, who never once looked away when everyone else found somewhere better to point their eyes. The phones went in. The woman with 2 phones gave hers up last, and only when the security man simply stood in front of her and waited until standing there became unbearable. Min-jae turned back to Sabine. Now, the beginning. So she told it, standing in the aisle with a borrowed blanket held closed at her throat, the tear at her hip still open to the recycled air. She walked the cabin back through it in order, plain, no adjectives, the way she'd been trained to give a safety brief. She asked for water, no ice, lemon. She set the glass crooked so my arm would cross her. When I straightened it, she told me not to reach in front of her. Sabine's eyes went to Victoria as she spoke, but her voice stayed pointed at the recorder, at the cabin, at the timestamp. She said the coffee was cold 4 minutes after I poured it steaming. She poured it out on the carpet herself and said, "Look what you made me do." Victoria's mouth opened. Min-jae lifted one finger off his own thigh, barely a movement, and she closed it. "Then she told me what girls like me are for," Sabine went on. "She said being pretty doesn't buy a seat at the table. She looked at you," a small nod at Min-jae, "and she told me to clean the floor, because that was the table I'd been given." Something moved behind Min-jae's flat expression, not surprise. He had heard it live, something colder than surprise, filing itself away. "And then," he said, "and then I asked her to say it in front of the captain, and she came out of her seat and tore my jacket." Sabine lifted the folded blazer an inch off her arm, showed the ripped shoulder seam, the missing button, set it back down, and a minute ago she came out of her seat again, and this time there was wine in my hand. She let that sit. "I'm not going to pretend the wine was an accident. I threw it." "She'll want that logged too. Log it." For the first time, one corner of Min-jae's mouth moved, not a smile. The ghost of respect for someone who indicted herself in the same breath she indicted her attacker, because a clean record was worth more to her than a flattering one. He turned, finally, to Victoria. She had shrunk into the ivory seat, one bare shoulder, the stain drying darker at the edges, mascara starting to go at the corners of her eyes. She reached for him, the way she'd reached for him all flight, with the assumption of ownership. "Min-jae, she attacked me, you saw." "Don't." One word from him, and it cut deeper than all of Sabine's paragraphs. "Don't use my name like it's yours." We were. He said it without heat, which was what made it final. Heat could be argued with, apologized to, walked back after a good dinner. This had no temperature at all. "You did this in my cabin, in front of my people. You put your hands on a woman doing her job, and you said those words with my name in your mouth, like I'd be proud." He shook his head, once. "I watched you do it. That's the part I'll have to live with. I watched." Sabine's grip tightened on the blanket. There it was, the thing she'd clocked back in the first hour, when he'd let the crooked glass go and said nothing, when he'd let the first insult pass and only leaned forward. He had watched. He was admitting it now, out loud, into the same recorder. It didn't warm her toward him. It just told her he knew the weight of what he'd carried and decided not to set down. She'd decide later what to do with a man honest about his own smallness. Not now. "You'll apologize," Min-jae told Victoria. "Not to me, to her, and not here, where it's cheap. On the ground, in front of whoever's waiting." He glanced at the flight deck door, then back. "There'll be people waiting. There always are, for a charter like this. You'll stand in front of them, and you'll say what you did, in your own words, and cabin lead will be standing next to you to make sure the words are true. You can't make me. I'm not making you." He straightened his cuff, the heavy watch catching the light. I'm telling you what happens to the version of you that keeps the family name clean versus the version that had wine thrown on her because everyone with a phone in the galley bin already knows why. He let that land. Choose. Victoria's face did the arithmetic he'd handed her, and Sabine watched something worse than anger arrive behind the woman's eyes. Calculation, and underneath the calculation, fear, and underneath the fear, something that looked almost like a person taking an order she didn't fully understand. It flickered and was gone. Sabine filed it without knowing yet that it mattered. The intercom broke the silence. Cabin lead, flight deck. We're beginning our descent for the fuel stop in 20 minutes. I'll need everyone seated and the aisle secured. And a pause. The smallest pause. I've logged the recorder as continuous, per your request. It stays on the ground. Copy, Captain, Sabine said. Thank you. Min-jae stepped back toward his seat. As he passed her, he stopped, close enough that only she could hear it over the engines. You could have covered up, he said, eyes flicking once to the open tear at her hip, then back up, respectful, not lingering. You didn't. I know what covering up looks like from the outside, Sabine said. It looks like guilt. I don't have any. He held her gaze a moment. No, he agreed. You don't. My mother covered up for 30 years, she added, quieter, because the recorder was behind them now, and this part was hers. Buttoned to the throat in other people's kitchens. She thought if the collar was straight enough, they'd use her name. Her fist stayed closed on the blanket. They never did. I'm not doing it on a plane that pays me to be seen. Min-jae took that in without answering. Some things a man learns better by saying nothing to, and he had spent a whole flight learning her. Then he sat and buckled in and looked out the window at the mountains coming up to meet them, and for the rest of the descent he did not say another word, which, from him, Sabine was beginning to understand, was the loudest thing a man could do. She moved down the aisle doing her job. Seatbelts. Trays up. She checked Victoria's belt last, leaned in, and Victoria flinched from her hand, as if the wine might come back. Fasten it, Sabine said quietly. We're landing. Then, lower, only for the two of them, no recorder catching it. The one sentence she let herself have. You wanted the cabin to watch me on the floor. They watched you put me there instead. Victoria's hands shook on the buckle. She got it closed on the third try. Sabine straightened. She checked the galley. Phone sealed. Bin noted. Grace's careful handwriting on the manifest with the time. She checked the flight deck door. Locked. She checked the blanket at her own throat. Still closed. Still hers to open or not on her own terms. Below the descending aircraft, on the private apron of an airfield she had landed at 100 times, the first of the vans was already pulling up to the terminal glass. Sabine could not see them yet. But somebody could. Somebody had already made a call the moment the phones went into the bin, a call from a device that had never been in the cabin at all, and by the time the wheels touched the runway, there would be more people waiting on the ground than there had ever been passengers in the air. She took her jump seat. She pulled the harness across her chest, over the gray blanket, over the torn navy dress, and locked it. She had won the cabin. She did not yet know that winning the cabin was exactly what someone had needed her to do. The wheels touched the fuel stop runway, and the terminal glass was already crowded. Sabine saw the shapes before she could count them. Not passengers, not ground crew in vests. A cluster of coats and long lenses pressed against the private lounge windows, and one of them lifted a camera the moment the aircraft slowed. She unclipped the jump seat harness. The gray blanket stayed on her shoulders because the reserve uniform was still folded in the crew locker 2 galleys back, and there was no time now to change into it. Grace came down the aisle fast. There are people out there. I see them. How do they know? Sabine did not answer that, because she was thinking about the phone that had never been in the cabin, The call placed at the exact minute the devices went into the bin. Someone had told the terminal what to send. Min Jae stood. He buttoned the charcoal jacket with one hand and looked through the glass at the cameras, the way a man looks at weather he already planned around. "They are not mine," he said. "I didn't ask whose they were." "You were going to." The forward door opened. Cold air off the tarmac climbed the stairs. Below, two black vans idled with their doors already sliding, and a woman in a company blazer waited at the bottom step with a tablet held against her chest like a shield. Victoria had not moved from the forward left suite. The wine had dried dark down the front of the ivory dress, and one shoulder sat bare where the sleeve had come away. She was looking at the cameras too, and something in her face changed when she understood they were pointed at the door she would have to walk through. "I can't go out there like this," Victoria said. "You can," Sabine said. "You made me stand here like this. You can walk down 4 steps." The company woman climbed halfway up the stairs and stopped when she saw the cabin. Her eyes moved over the wine, the torn sleeve, the blanket around Sabine's shoulders, the small gold button that no one had found. She said her name was Klein, that she handled ground media for private movements, and that the plan was a short statement on the apron and nothing more. "Whose plan?" Sabine said. Klein glanced at Victoria, then at Min Jae, and answered neither of them. "Miss Harrington will make a brief apology, then we clear the area. She'll say what she did," Sabine said. "All of it. Or she says nothing, and they film her saying nothing." Klein started to speak. Min Jae lifted 2 fingers off the seat back, and she stopped the way the security man had stopped an hour earlier, and Sabine filed that away too, the ease with which people around this man learned to freeze. They went down the stairs in an order no one announced. Victoria first, because she was the one the cameras wanted. Sabine second, 1 step behind and to the side, the blanket held closed at her collar with one fist. Min Jae last, unhurried, the overcoat now over the charcoal suit, the dragon at his throat catching the gray daylight above the open collar. The cameras found Victoria and stayed on her. Klein positioned her beside the van with the terminal glass behind, so the shot would frame money and altitude, not a woman with wine down her dress. A microphone appeared from somewhere. Victoria's platinum hair moved in the wind, and she lifted her chin and found the version of her face that photographed well even now. "I want to apologize," Victoria said, "for a misunderstanding on the flight. Emotions were high, things were said. I regret that anyone felt hurt." The words came out smooth and rehearsed, and Sabine understood in that instant that they had been written before the plane landed, maybe before it took off, and that Victoria was reading them off the inside of her own skull. "Say what you did," Sabine's voice carried past the microphone. 2 lenses swung toward her. Victoria's jaw tightened. "I've apologized." "You apologized to the air!" Sabine stepped forward, so the blanket and the torn dress were in frame now, whether Klein wanted them there or not. "You didn't name it. Name it." "Sabine." Klein's hand came up. "She spilled a cup on purpose and told me to look what I made her do." Sabine kept her eyes on Victoria, not the cameras. "She told me to clean the floor. She said the floor was the table I'd been given. She said girls like me think being pretty buys a seat." A camera shutter ran fast. 3 frames. 4. "Then she stood up," Sabine said, "and she tore my uniform, twice. She put her nails in the seam and pulled until you could see skin. That's what she did. That's the misunderstanding." The wind filled the silence. Victoria's mouth opened. For a moment, she was not the woman with the written words. She was younger than her face, and cornered, and her eyes went sideways to Min Jae the way they had gone sideways in the cabin, looking for a hand to tell her what to do. Min Jae said nothing. He watched her the way he had watched everything, and this time his silence was not a verdict for the cameras. It landed on Victoria like a door closing. "I'm sorry," Victoria said, and then, lower, off the smooth track, in a voice that sounded almost real, "I did those things. I said those things to her." The lenses ate it. For one breath, the apron held completely still. A reporter near the front lowered his camera an inch, as if the shot had already given him what he came for. Sabine watched Victoria's chin drop a fraction, the platinum hair sliding forward across one cheek, and she saw the exact second the woman stopped performing and simply stood in what she had said. It was the first honest thing Victoria had given her in 14 hours of flying. Klein moved in and cut the moment, one arm sweeping toward the open van door, and the ground crew closed around Victoria and folded her into the dark interior before she could say a fifth word. The door slid shut. The van pulled off across the apron toward the far gate, and the cameras chased it, and for 11 seconds Sabine stood in the wind with the blanket at her collar and felt something she had no name for. It was not victory. She had told herself in the jump seat that she had won the cabin, and she had believed it. Standing on the apron, she felt the shape of the win and did not trust it. Grace came down the stairs with the folded reserve uniform and the crew bag. "You did it," she said. "You made her say it, in front of everyone." "Yes," Sabine said. "So why do you look like that?" Sabine watched the second van, the one that had not moved, its side door still open, a man in gray standing beside it, with a thin metal case chained to his left wrist. She had seen the caseboard in Zurich. She had logged it as carry-on secured to the passenger, the man with the fine glasses and the earpiece who had said almost nothing the whole flight. Ji-hoon Park. She remembered the name from the manifest because he had corrected her pronunciation of it once, quietly, and then apologized for correcting her. The case was still on his wrist. That was the thing her eye caught and would not release, and she did not understand yet why it mattered. Min-jae reached the bottom of the stairs. He looked at her, and for a moment it seemed he might say the thing that had been building since the cabin. Then Klein was at his elbow with the tablet, and a second aide, and the private movement swallowed him the way it swallowed everything, and he was gone into the terminal with his people around him. Sabine changed into the reserve uniform in a cold room off the lounge. Charcoal gray, plain, no crimson scarf, because the scarf was in her bag, folded, torn, and she had not been able to make herself throw it away. She pinned her hair back. She looked in the mirror over the sink and saw a flight attendant who had done everything right and could not shake the feeling that right had been the trap. The flight continued to Seoul, then the rotation home. She flew the legs on autopilot, served the trays, checked the belts, and told the story to no one, because Grace had the recording logged, and the company had the cockpit file, and there was nothing left to say that the timestamps did not already say better. It was 4 days before the story turned. She was at the kitchen table in the beige knit sweater, the black trousers, bare feet on the cold floor, a mug going cold at her elbow, when the phone rang with a number from the company's legal office. A Sunday. Legal did not call on Sundays for good news. The voice belonged to a man named Whitaker's assistant, and then to Whitaker himself, and the words arrived in an order designed to sound like concern. There had been a report, an anonymous report. It concerned items missing from the aircraft after the Zurich rotation, sensitive documents. The report named her. "Named me how?" Sabine said. "It alleges you removed materials from a passenger's secured case during the disturbance." She stood up, the chair scraped. "I filed a full log of that flight, every minute. The recorder ran the whole time. Captain Lindquist logged it. I asked him to." "We're aware of the log," Whitaker said, and there was a pause in his voice that she would remember later, a small hitch where a truthful man would have said something and he said nothing. "There's a gap. A gap. 7 minutes are missing from the cabin recording," during the descent, the audio and the camera both. Sabine's hand found the edge of the counter. That's not possible. He ordered it kept running. He said not to stop it, not on the ground, not for anyone. The gap corresponds to the window in which the case was reportedly opened. Whitaker's voice smoothed back over the hitch. Given the allegation, and given the profile of the passengers involved, the company is suspending you pending review. It's procedure. It protects you as much as it protects us. It doesn't protect me. It hangs me. Sabine. He said her name the way men said it when they had already signed the paper. The decision is made above me. I'm the one telling you gently. Gently. She laughed once, without any humor in it. You call on a Sunday and you call it gentle. I'm giving you the chance to hear it from a person instead of a letter. Then hear this back, she said. I logged everything. I asked for the recorder. Why would a woman stealing documents beg the captain to timestamp the flight? He was quiet a moment. That's a question for the review. 7 minutes. She was pacing now, the phone hot against her ear, the cold floor under her feet. Which 7 minutes? He told her, and she stood very still, because the window he named was not the window of the fight. The fight had been at Cruz, over the Alps, 40 minutes before that. The missing 7 minutes were during the descent, after the cameras had already seen everything, after Victoria had already been folded into the story as the villain, after Sabine had already narrated every insult into a recorder she believed was protecting her. 7 minutes later, when every eye in the cabin and every lens on the ground was still pointed at a torn navy uniform and a woman with wine down her dress. The case, Sabine said. Park's case, the one chained to his wrist. Where is it? I'm not able to discuss. It's gone, isn't it? That's what's missing. Not from my hands, from his wrist. Whitaker did not answer, and his silence was the second silence in 4 days that told her more than a sentence would have. She hung up before he could wrap the suspension in another soft word. She set the phone face down on the table. The mug had gone fully cold. Outside the window, the light was flat and gray, the ordinary light of an ordinary Sunday, and inside it, the thing she had thought was over was turning inside out in front of her. She had spent 13 hours defending a torn uniform. She had made a rich woman say the word racist into a microphone. She had stacked the blazer and the ruined sleeve and the stained napkin on the service cart like evidence, and thought the evidence was about her. The fight had never been about the uniform. She sat back down slowly. She thought about the order in which everything had happened, and for the first time, she thought about it not as a woman who had been wronged, but as a cabin lead who knew exactly how long a descent took and exactly what could be reached during one. The devices had gone into the bin, all of them. The security man had taken the woman's 2 phones. Grace had sealed the bin and marked the time on the manifest. And in that noise, in the exact minutes when the whole cabin was watching Victoria be dismantled, a call had gone out from a phone that was never in the bin because it had never been in the cabin. Someone had known there would be a disturbance. Someone had known it would be loud enough, ugly enough, filmed enough, to turn every head forward while a thin metal case came off a wrist in the back. Victoria's face on the apron came back to her, the sideways glance, the younger, cornered thing under the written words. The look of a person reading lines someone else had written and beginning to understand what the lines were for. Sabine had thought Victoria attacked her out of jealousy. She had thought the whole thing rose out of a woman who could not stand a man's quiet attention going to a flight attendant instead of to her. Maybe the jealousy was real, maybe it had always been real, and that was exactly why it had been so easy to use. She looked at her bag by the door. The torn crimson scarf was still inside it, folded, 4 days unwashed, carried home because she had not been able to let it go. She did not get up for it yet. She only looked at it and felt the cold floor, and understood that the review would not clear her, because the review would look at 7 missing minutes, and a passenger's word, and a flight attendant with a stained navy dress folded on a service cart, and it would see exactly the story someone had built for it to see. Her name, on a report, about theft, from the aircraft that carried the uniform she had spent her whole life earning. The phone buzzed once against the wood. A message, not a call. The care home. The autumn adjustment. The higher number. Due at the end of the month. The number the clean rotation was supposed to cover. Sabine turned the phone back over, and read it, and set it down again. Then she went to the bag by the door, and she crouched, and she took out the scarf. She did not unfold it yet. She held it in both hands, the weight of it wrong somehow, heavier at one corner than crimson silk had any right to be, and she sat on the cold floor of her own kitchen, with her back against the door, and understood 2 things at once. She had been suspended for a theft she did not commit, and whoever had committed it had needed her to win the cabin so completely that no one would ever think to look at the man in the back with the case on his wrist. The doorbell rang at 7 the next morning, and Sabine already knew it was not the mail. She had slept on the kitchen floor, not the bed. The floor kept her honest about where she was. She stood, pressed the cold out of her knees, and looked through the peephole. A courier in a gray jacket, a flat envelope, stiff-backed, the airline's crest pressed into the corner in silver foil. She signed for it with a hand that had served 10,000 strangers and never shook once. It did not shake now. Inside was 1 page, a letter, and beneath the letter, thicker, stapled at the spine, a second document with a blue cover and a title she read 3 times before it stopped rearranging itself in front of her eyes. Confidentiality and mutual release agreement. Her name was already typed into the party line. There was a tab, a small pink arrow tab, stuck to the page where a signature was supposed to go. They had printed her name before she agreed to anything. That was the part that told her everything. She set the folder on the counter, face up, and made coffee. Black. She did not sit. The phone rang at 8. Whitaker. She let it go to the 2nd ring, then the 3rd, because a woman who answers on the 1st ring sounds like a woman who has been waiting by the phone, and she would not give him that. Ms. Alexandra. His voice was warm, the way a waiting room is warm. You received the packet. I received a packet. Then, you understand, we're trying to help you here. You suspended me Sunday. It's Monday. She looked at the blue cover. That's fast help. A pause. The small pause of a man rearranging his face on the other end of a line. The situation is developing quickly. There's press interest. There's a client relationship that predates you, predates me, frankly. Everyone benefits from resolving this quietly. Everyone. She turned the word over. Say the names of everyone. Sabine. First name now. The shift was a tool, and she watched him reach for it. The company is prepared to lift the suspension, reinstate your seniority. There would be a payment, a generous one, to account for the disruption to your schedule. In exchange, you agree not to discuss the flight, any of it. The incident, the passengers, the allegations, all of it goes into one sealed drawer, and none of us opens it again. She stood very still by the window. Outside, a man walked a small dog past the row of parked cars. Ordinary Monday. The whole world was having an ordinary Monday. The allegation says I stole from an aircraft, she said. You want to pay me to not talk about being called a thief. I want to make the noise stop before it gets louder. For me or for the Harringtons? The pause was longer this time. In the pause, she heard the answer he would never say into a phone. Think it over, Whitaker said. The offer's good through Friday. He hung up first. She let him have that too. She stood in the kitchen for a long time after the line went dead. Then she picked up the blue document and read every line of it, the way she read a safety card to a cabin, slowly, out loud, moving her lips. Clause 4 said she would make no statement, written or verbal, to any media outlet, regulator, or third party. Clause 6 said the allegation of theft would be characterized in company records as unresolved rather than withdrawn. Unresolved. They would not clear her. They would only agree to stop saying it out loud, in writing, for money, and the file would keep her name in it forever, with a small gray word beside it that meant maybe. She put the pen down. She had not picked it up. It was already lying on the counter where the courier's clipboard had left it, and she noticed she had been holding it, and she put it down. The second call came at 11, not the company, the care home. The administrator's voice was kind and rehearsed, and she recognized the shape of it because she used it herself, on aircraft, when the news was bad and the tone had to carry the passenger through it. The autumn adjustment, the new rate. It was in the letter, of course, but she wanted to confirm receipt and to gently remind, and there was a date, the end of the month, and after the date there were words like review of placement and alternative arrangements that both women understood without either of them saying the true one out loud. My mother's window faces the trees, Sabine said. It was not an argument. It was the only thing she could find to say. It's a lovely room, the administrator agreed. That's why there's a list for it. Sabine thanked her. She was good at thanking people. She hung up and stood with both hands flat on the counter and her head down. And for one breath, she let the weight sit on her spine, the way her mother's had sat for 30 years, buttoned to the collar, bent over other people's sinks. Then she straightened. Because her mother had straightened every time, and the straightening was the whole inheritance. She walked the apartment once, slowly, the way she walked a cabin before a flight. She counted what was hers to lose. The rent, due in 3 weeks. The care home, due at the end of the month. The savings that had a shape when she had a salary and now had a deadline instead. She stood in the small bathroom and looked at her own face in the mirror, at the woman who had told 100 passengers to breathe normally, and she practiced it on herself, in and out, until the mirror stopped tilting. 12 years. She said the number to the glass. 12 years of clean logs and perfect counts and passengers who never learned her name, traded in a weekend for a gray word in a file she would never be allowed to read. The rotation would have covered the number, the clean rotation, the VIP charter, the seniority that came with flying the routes. No one junior was trusted to fly. She had flown it clean. She had protected her integrity across 14 hours and 1 torn uniform, and she had won the cabin so completely that no camera in the world could have found a flaw in her, and the reward for that was a blue folder and a gray word and a mother with a window that now belonged to a waiting list. She opened her laptop and typed the name of the airline into the search bar because she had to know the size of the thing that was falling on her. It was worse than she thought, and better, and the two arrived together. The video of Victoria on the apron had gone everywhere. Millions of views, comment sections she should not have read and read anyway. Half the world had made her a symbol, the flight attendant who would not be broken, the woman who made the heiress say what she did. Strangers wrote her name like a banner. There were graphics. There were slogans laid over the frame where she stood at the bottom of the stairs, with the gray blanket at her collar, and named every act into the lens. And underneath the celebration, threaded through it, quiet at first, and then not quiet, the other story had started to grow. A source close to the investigation. Materials missing from a secured case. The flight attendant at the center of the viral incident, now under internal review for theft. No name in the headlines yet, but the shape of a name. The shape of her. They had built her up so the fall would be taller. She saw it the way you see the geometry of a thing once, cleanly, and can never unsee it. The louder the world had cheered the woman who could not be broken, the more delicious it would be to reveal that she was a thief. The applause was the scaffolding. Someone had understood that. Someone had understood it before the plane ever left Zurich. She closed the laptop. Her phone buzzed against the counter. A message, not a call. Grace. Are you okay? Then, before Sabine could answer, a second line. They asked me to hand over my copy of the log. The company. This morning. Sabine's thumb hovered. Did you? She wrote. The reply took a while, long enough that Sabine watched the 3 dots appear and vanish and appear again, and understood that on the other end, a 26-year-old with a small cross at her collar was choosing between her job and her spine. I made a copy of the copy first, Grace wrote. Then I gave them the one they asked for. Sabine put her hand over her mouth. Not crying, she did not cry, but something moved through her that was close to it, and closer to gratitude, and she typed back the only thing that mattered. Don't lose it. And don't tell anyone you have it. Not for me, for you. If they know, they'll come for your job the way they came for mine. I know, Grace wrote. I'm not brave. I'm just tired of pretending I didn't see it. Sabine set the phone down face up so the screen light would keep her company. That was as much as she would allow herself. One ally, keeping one file, in a drawer somewhere across the city. It was not a rescue. It was a woman refusing to look away, and Sabine knew the difference now, better than she had ever known it, because she was drowning in the people who could look away and had. The afternoon went gray at the edges. She did not turn on the lamps. At 4 the buzzer went again, and this time it was not a courier and not the mail. A man in a good coat, not the airline's crest, no crest at all, holding a card between 2 fingers, the way people hold a thing they expect to be taken. He said a name that meant a firm, one of the firms whose names are designed to sound like weather, and he said he represented interests aligned with a swift resolution, and he said it would be in her interest to speak with him before she made any decisions about the company's offer. Whose interests? She said, through the gap of the chain she had not unlatched. He smiled the way a door smiles. Interests that would prefer this end well for everyone. Everyone again. The word had followed her all day, from Whitaker's mouth to this man's card, and every time it was said, it meant a smaller circle, and she was never inside it. I have a lawyer, she said. She did not have a lawyer. Then have your lawyer call this number. He posted the card through the gap. It fell to the floor at her feet. The offer, Ms. Alexandra, is more generous than you'll be told it is, and it expires with the news cycle. When the world stops watching, no one will pay to keep you quiet, because your silence will already be free. He left. She listened to his shoes on the stairs, unhurried, a man who had said this in many doorways and would say it in many more. She did not pick up the card. She looked at it, face up on the floor, next to the wall, and she thought about how many objects had ended up on floors this week. A champagne flute, a coffee cup, her own body, almost, if she had let it. She left the card where it lay. She went to the bag by the door. She had been avoiding it since Sunday. The bag held the reserve uniform, folded, the gray charcoal one with no scarf, and under it, at the bottom, where she had put it because she could not throw it away and could not bear to look at it, the torn crimson scarf from the flight. 4 days now, 5. She had lost the count that mattered. She crouched. She took the scarf out. It was the one thing on this earth that was still, without question, hers. Not the company's, not evidence in anyone's file, not a symbol on a stranger's screen. Her mother had pressed collars into armor for 30 years, and this scrap of ruined silk was the version Sabine had bought with her own back, and it was torn, and they had torn it, and she held it in both hands in the gray light of a kitchen she might not be able to afford by winter. Something in one corner sat heavier than silk should sit. She had noticed it Sunday. Her thumb found the weight again now, a small firmness through the fabric. in the hem, and she almost worked her fingers into the fold to find what it was. The phone rang. She flinched. The scarf stayed in her lap. The screen lit with a number she did not know, a mobile, no name, and she almost let it ring out with all the others. Something made her answer. Later she would not be able to say what. Yes. Silence on the line, breathing, then a voice she knew, lowered, careful, a voice that had commanded a cabin from a leather seat without ever raising itself, and it said 4 words that stopped the room. Don't sign anything yet. Sabine's hand closed around the scarf. Minjae, she said, not a question. They're moving faster than I can, he said, and the line was bad, or he was somewhere he shouldn't be. The theft, the 7 minutes, it isn't what they're telling you it is. It isn't even what it's telling me. You knew my number. I asked. I shouldn't have. I'm asking you not to sign, and then I'll never call again if that's what you want. She looked at the blue folder on the counter. She looked at the card on the floor. She looked at the scarf in her lap with its one heavy corner, and she did not tell him about it because she did not yet know what it was, and because a woman who has been made a thief learns very fast to say nothing about the one thing in the room that might be evidence. Everyone keeps calling me today, she said, and her voice was steady, and steady cost her everything. The company, a man with a card, now you, and every single one of you says the same word, resolution, quiet, easy, and every single one of you needs me to sign something, or shut up, or take money, or forgive you. I'm not asking you to forgive me, Minjae said. Then what? The line breathed. I'm asking you to wait, he said, until you know who tore your uniform, and why, and it was never who you think. That's all. Wait. The call ended, or dropped. She held the dead phone against her jaw for a long moment. Then she set it down. She sat on the cold floor with her back to the door, the way she had sat the night before, the scarf in both hands, and its one small secret still folded inside it, unopened, waiting. She had lost the job that was her name. She had a folder that would pay her to stay a maybe thief forever, a mother whose window was going onto a list, a single frightened ally with a copy in a drawer, and the voice of the man who had watched it happen, telling her to wait. She turned the scarf over once in her hands. She felt the weight shift in the corner. She did not open it. Not yet. Not tonight. Tonight she would sit on the floor and let the room go dark around her and refuse, one more time, the easy thing that every powerful voice in the city wanted her to do. Tomorrow she would open it. Morning came gray through the kitchen window, and Sabine was already awake, the scarf across her knees. She had not slept on the floor after all. She had moved to the chair by the counter sometime in the dark, and there she stayed, holding the crimson silk in both hands, the way her mother used to hold a hem before threading a needle. She turned the scarf until the heavy corner faced up. Her thumb found the seam. 4 days she had carried the weight without naming it. Now she pressed the fabric flat against the counter and worked the folded hem open with one nail, the way she opened everything. Slow, deliberate, no drama. Something small slid loose and rang against the granite. She stopped breathing for a second, then leaned closer. A sliver of metal, no longer than a fingernail, thin as a coin's edge, one side smooth and one side torn. It had a fine machined ridge along the smooth edge and a stamped mark she could not read without light. She carried it to the window, held it up. The ridge caught the gray morning and threw it back. She knew that ridge. She had signed for it in Zurich. A seal. The kind that clamps a security case shut and shears when the case is forced. Ji-hoon Park's case. The metal case cuffed to his left wrist. The one she had logged as secured carry-on before the doors closed. The one still cuffed to him on the apron 4 days ago. The one that vanished in the 7 erased minutes. A piece of its seal was in her scarf. She sat down, not because her legs failed, because she needed the counter under her forearms to think. The scarf had been torn from her shoulder during the fight, torn in the cabin, at cruise, over the Alps. 40 minutes before the descent where the case disappeared. If a fragment of that seal was caught in the silk, then the seal had already been worked on during the fight, during the noise. While every face in the cabin turned forward to watch a passenger tear a flight attendant's uniform, the fight was the cover. She had known that since Sunday. What she had not known was that the theft began while the fight was still happening, that the case was being opened, quietly, in the same minutes she was on her knees over spilled coffee. She set the fragment on a clean square of paper towel, photographed it against the window light, photographed it again beside a ruler from the drawer. Then she folded the towel over it and put it in the zip pocket of her bag, the inside one, the one that closed. The 7 minutes had been erased by someone with access to the aircraft's recording system. Whitaker had said the gap was clean, audio and camera both, timed to the descent. A passenger could not reach that system. A flight attendant could not reach it in the air without the flight deck. That kind of access lived in maintenance, in ground technical crew, in the people who prepped the aircraft in Zurich before anyone boarded. Which meant the erasing had been arranged before the plane left the ground. She spread it out on the counter in her head, flat and cold. A seal cut during the fight, a case gone in the descent. 7 minutes wiped by someone who had touched the system before takeoff. 3 things that could only line up if the fight had been ordered in advance to fall exactly where it fell. Someone had needed her to win the cabin, completely, loud enough to pull every eye forward. Her phone buzzed, a number with no name. She let it ring twice, then answered without speaking. "It's me," a woman's voice, low, rushed. "Not Grace. Don't hang up." Sabine stood very still. "I'm outside," Victoria said. "Don't make me say it in the hall." She came in wearing a beige coat and a scarf tied over her hair. Dark glasses she took off the moment the door closed. Without the diamonds and the platinum shine, she looked younger and worse. The skin under her eyes bruised with sleeplessness. "You shouldn't be here," Sabine said. "I know." Victoria stayed by the door, hands in her coat pockets. "I have 9 minutes. He thinks I'm at the lawyer's." "Who's he?" Victoria's jaw moved. "My father." Sabine did not offer her a chair. She waited. "The things I said on the plane," Victoria's voice went flat, reciting. "Clean the floor." The floor was the table. "Girls like you." She swallowed. "I didn't write those." "I know you didn't." That landed harder than any accusation. Victoria's eyes came up, wet and furious. "You know? I watched you look sideways for permission after every line. On the plane, on the apron." Sabine kept her voice even. "People don't check for approval when the words are theirs." Victoria pressed the back of her hand to her mouth. When she lowered it, she was steadier. "He gave me the sentences the night before Zurich, made me repeat them until they sounded like mine. He said the boss watches quiet women, that CO would fix his attention on the competent one, and that I should make a scene about it. A jealous scene, ugly enough to film." Her voice cracked on the last word. "He said jealousy reads true because it is true. That was the point. That's why he picked me for it." "Picked you?" "His own daughter." Victoria laughed, a short broken sound. "You think I'm the villain. I was the distraction, same as you." Sabine's hands had gone cold. "Why?" "The case." Victoria's gaze dropped. "There were documents in Park's case. Something between my father and Seo's people. Something my father wanted and couldn't buy. He needed it gone during the flight, and he needed the whole cabin looking somewhere else when it went. So he built the somewhere else." She lifted her chin toward Sabine. "You were the somewhere else. I was the match he struck. Park." The name came out of Sabine slow. "Ji-hoon Park is Seo's man." "Was. My father got to him first." Victoria's mouth twisted. The traitor was already inside the room. You just made everyone stop looking at him. The kitchen was very quiet. Somewhere below, a delivery truck idled and pulled away. And the anonymous tip, Sabine said. The theft they hung on me. Him. So the missing documents would have a thief who wasn't his. So the story ends with a flight attendant and a confidentiality deal, and nobody ever asks how a sealed case opened at 30,000 feet. Victoria's eyes went to the counter, to the paper towel, then back. He told me you'd sign. He said your kind always signs. He was pleased with himself. Why are you here? Victoria's composure finally went. Because I said those words to your face and watched them work. Because he used the one true thing in me to build the lie, and I let him, and I can't. She stopped, straightened. I can't get the plane back, but I can tell you the shape of it, once, and then I'm going to deny I ever came. You'll deny it. I have to. Her voice was small now. You don't know what he is when he's cornered. Not to strangers, to family. She put the glasses back on. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm telling you where to dig. She had her hand on the door when Sabine spoke. Victoria. The blonde stopped. The jealousy was real. Yes, that's the part he couldn't have faked. Sabine held her look. You should sit with which part was yours. Victoria went out without answering. The door clicked. 9 minutes, gone in 6. Sabine did not sit down to grieve it. She sat down to work. She spread the paper towel open again, set the fragment beside it, opened her laptop, and started writing the way she wrote incident logs. No adjectives, in order, each fact on its own line. Seal fragment recovered from crew scarf, torn cabin, cruise. Case cuffed to park, left wrist, secured Zurich. Case absent, apron, 4 days later. 7 minutes erased, descent, audio and camera. System access requires pre-flight technical contact. She stared at the last line for a long time. Then the thing she had been circling since the apron came all the way up, clean and procedural, the way only 12 years in a cabin could make it. A sealed case did not vanish into a passenger's coat. It was too large, too rigid, cuffed to a wrist. It could not have left the cabin in the descent. The doors were armed. The aisle was full. She had run the landing service herself. It had not gone off the aircraft at the apron either, because Park was still wearing it when she saw him at the second van. So the documents came out of the case, and the case stayed cuffed, and the documents went somewhere on the aircraft that could be reached during descent and only during descent. She knew that somewhere. There was a compartment behind the aft galley, low, service only, that equalized with the cabin as the aircraft came down through altitude. Pressurized in cruise, accessible on descent. Crew were trained to open it below a set altitude, and never above. A passenger would not know it existed. A cabin lead knew exactly when its latch would give. Whoever hid those documents had known the descent window too, had timed the 7 minutes to it, had needed the recording dark for exactly as long as it took to move papers from a cuffed case into a compartment that only opened on the way down. Which meant the documents had never left the plane. Sabine sat back. For the first time in 4 days, something in her chest let go. Not relief, not yet. Aim. She was not the suspect. She was the only person on that flight who could say precisely where the missing thing had been put, and when, and why no one else in the cabin could have reached it. She picked up her phone and called Grace. The copy of the copy, she said. The log. Don't hand it to the company. Hand it to the regulator's safety office, directly, today. A pause. They'll ask why. Because the erased 7 minutes are a descent window, and the log timestamps prove the case was intact at cruise and gone by the apron. Tell them to search the aft service compartment before the aircraft flies again. Sabine's voice stayed level. Tell them a cabin lead says the documents never left the plane. Grace exhaled. You're sure? I logged the seal in Zurich. I have a piece of it here. She looked at the fragment on the towel. I'm not asking you to be brave, Grace. I'm asking you to be a witness. That's all I've ever asked. For you, Grace said. For the record, Sabine said. That's the only thing that clears me, and it's the only thing that stays. The regulator held the aircraft on the ground. They opened the aft compartment on a Thursday, with the company's lawyers watching and a safety inspector's camera running, and they found a flat, waterproof envelope wedged behind the equalization panel, the documents from Park's case, intact, exactly where a woman who had never touched them said they would be. It came apart quickly after that, the way engineered things do when one bolt is pulled. The seal fragment matched Park's case. The scarf's chain of custody was clean. Grace's secondary log time-stamped every hour. The 7 minutes had been erased from a maintenance terminal that had been accessed in Zurich before boarding, under Park's contractor credentials. Ji-hoon Park, who had stood in every room as the most precise and most loyal man present, was the man who had opened a sealed case at altitude and hidden its contents on the way down. And the tip that named Sabine had been placed from a phone that traced, through 2 shells and a law office, to Richard Harrington. They did not arrest a legend that afternoon. They arrested a contractor first, and a media fixer with an expiring offer, and then, on a gray Monday that Sabine read about rather than watched, they came for the man in the pinstripe suit with the rimless glasses, and his operation, which had run on other people never being looked at, ended the moment everyone finally looked. The company reinstated her. Not Whitaker. Whitaker was gone by then, folded into the same collapse. It was the record that reinstated her. Her own log, Grace's copy, Lindquist's timestamps, the compartment, the seal. The confidentiality agreement with her name already printed on it was voided in a letter she read once and did not keep. The theft accusation was not marked unresolved. It was withdrawn, in writing, with an apology on company letterhead she found she did not need. She flew again 3 weeks later. Zurich rotation, the one that covered the number. Her mother kept the room with the window facing the trees. Min Jae-seo asked to see her the day before she went back on the line. Not through a fixer. He came himself, to a coffee place she chose, a plain one near the care home, and he sat in a black turtleneck, with the dragon rising past the collar, and his hands flat on the table, like a man who had decided not to reach for anything. "You found it," he said. "I found a piece of it. You told me it wasn't who I thought." She sat across from him. "You knew Park. I trained him." Something moved behind his flat eyes. "For 6 years, I would have said he was the last man in the room I needed to watch. That was the point of him. Your father-in-law," he stopped, corrected himself. "Harrington bought the one man I stopped watching. You stopped watching a lot of things on that plane. He took it, did not flinch, did not defend. Yes." The waiter set down 2 black coffees. Neither of them touched them. "I can undo the money side," Min Jae said. "The care home, the rotation you don't need to fly, a position with my company, real, senior, more than they'll ever pay you. Say the word, and none of it is a problem again." Sabine looked at him for a long moment. "No. It's not a payment. It's not the francs on the tray. I know what it is." She turned her cup a quarter turn on the saucer and left it. "You watched a woman get told the floor was her table, and you sat forward, and you let it finish. Then you offered to fix everything after, because fixing is easier than the other thing." "What's the other thing?" "You know what it is." His jaw worked once, then, quiet, in a room with no recorder, and no cabin, and no one watching. "I'm sorry. I watched it happen to you, and I told myself I was gathering facts. I wasn't. I was waiting to see how much you'd take before I moved. That's mine to carry." She let it sit, Let it be a real thing in the air between them, and not something either of them rushed to cover. That, she said finally, that's the only thing I'll take from you. He nodded slowly, reached into his coat. She watched his hand, and set nothing on the table. Withdrew it empty. There's a number, he said. Mine. I'm not going to leave it, and I'm not going to press it into your hand. I'm asking if I can give it to you. Sabine held his eyes. On one condition, her voice did not soften. You make sure, through the regulator, in writing, on the record, not with a phone call to a friend, that no cabin crew who flew that route is touched. Not Grace, not the purser, not the reserve girl, no quiet retaliation, no lost rotations, no names in gray files. You guarantee that the legal way, where it can be checked. And then you can call, after I've seen it done, not before. For the first time since Zurich, something in his face that was not calculation and was not command. He said the number once. She did not write it down. He watched her not write it down, and understood that she had it anyway. You remember numbers? He said. I logged your tip in Zurich. I remember everything about that flight. She stood, put money on the table for both coffees before he could, and left him the change to divide with the invisible crew. That's why I'm the one still standing. The package came to her door the following week. No crest, a plain box, her name in a hand she didn't know. Inside, folded in tissue, a square of navy fabric, a panel of a flight attendant's blazer, the torn shoulder seam rewoven by hand, one small gold button, sewn back where a button had been lost under a row of seats over the Alps. Restored, not replaced, the same cloth, mended. There was a card. She read it standing in the doorway, the way she read everything. The fight started because of jealousy. The war started because you saw something you weren't supposed to. She turned the card over. Nothing on the back. She set it on the counter, next to the paper towel that no longer held anything, and she picked up the mended navy square and held it against her collar, the way her mother used to hold a hem to the light. Then she said the thing out loud, to the empty kitchen, to the window facing east, to 12 years and a mother buttoned into other people's kitchens, and every powerful voice in the city that had wanted her quiet. You tore my uniform to put me in my place. Her thumb moved over the reset button. Now you'll find out my place was never beneath anyone. She folded the fabric once, carefully, and put it where she kept the things that were hers. Outside, the morning went bright over the trees. Somewhere a phone with a number she had not written down waited to ring. Somewhere a man in a pinstripe suit was learning what it cost to be looked at. And somewhere over an ocean an aircraft was climbing east. Doors armed, galley counted. A cabin lead she had trained the standard for still checking that every latch held. The fight was over. The war had only just begun. If you want to watch all the stories without any ads and also get access to bonus scenes, extended epilogues, and exclusive spicy chapters, head over to our Patreon. Scan the QR code on the screen. The link is in the description or in the pinned comment. See you there. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever worn a uniform, a title, a role that the world used to decide you were beneath them? When someone tore at your dignity to keep you in your place, did you find the courage to name exactly what they did? And when the truth was hiding in the smallest thing you almost threw away, would you have known to look? Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about dignity, truth, and courage, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel